It's almost giving us a glimpse into different ways of being in the world, different possibilities of experience.
And it shows us how much we don't kind of know is there. I think we assume we see everything and we hear everything, and that our words for our experience encapsulate everything, and other animals just have kind of shallower experiences of that human experience, and we're 10 out of 10 on everything, and how close to 10 are they? But there's just realms where our words fall short. And these arguments about anthropomorphism, where we're like, should we use the word grief for a whale because we don't know? Well, what if they feel it more profoundly? You know, pilot whales mass strand, and they all wash up when most of them are healthy. And it's not always when there's Navy sonar, and it's not always when they're scared. Sometimes it seems to be because some of the individuals are in distress and the others can't bear to leave them. I was just in the Canaries with guys who saw mother pilot whales carrying their dead calves around on their nose day after day, and they played me the sounds they make, and they seem to make particular kind of vocalizations when they're carrying around their calves, and their cortisol levels are high and they lose weight. And it's very strange to sort of think that's not a form of distress related to the death of their calf. But if they're so tightly bonded that they die altogether rather than leave each other, perhaps the feeling of separation for them is more powerful than the words that we have for our separation problems like grief and breakups. So blue whales, when they vocalize the most powerful sounds ever made by a voice, they can travel 500 miles, perhaps 1,000 miles. We call them solitary, because for us, to be alone is to not be able to see each other. But if you can hear your friend across an ocean, are you ever alone? Is there even a way of being solitary for an animal like that? But then we killed 99.9% of them in some places.
And we filled the oceans with noise
sound
as well.
So those whales which are capable of being social on the level of a sea are drowned out and are forced into a solitary mode. But now, and they're confounding us. You know, we're seeing aggregations of humpback whales of, like, again, they're thought to just only get together in ones or twos. 200 of them getting together in some places. And we're seeing, when we get quiet, their voices change. And the anthropores, when all our shipping during COVID reduced, they were less stressed and they seemed to make more complicated sounds. Because we've only been studying whales, and we've only had these tools really very recently, we killed most of them before we started, and we filled the seas with noise. What knowledge of how to live in all the different kinds of seas in the world that these different tribes of whales had has gone, and we're just seeing the remnants, the young ones, the survivors, kind of patching life back together in a changing, loud sea. It's really upsetting.
One of the things that I loved in your book was the way you mix or balance the science and the rational thinking with, I don't know what you'd call it, empathy or wonder, spirit. Through the book, there's a constant tension between those two things, but then they're also supporting each other.
I've spent like 20 years hanging out with different biologists. They say different things when they're in their official mode than when you stop recording. But they're both things they think. But the things they say when you're recording are the things they feel they're allowed to say to not look silly and be professional. But then they'll tell you something they believe to be true, but they haven't quite got the boxes all ticked on the papers yet. So for me, that's all evidence. They're all people who experience the world and bring back things to show you. And especially with stuff in the sea, with weird animals doing unexpected things. You encounter a thing that happens and you try and understand what it might mean.
Well, that's the thing, giving you the questions to ask, or even the curiosity or the sort of passion to care about what's happening to these creatures.
I think the scientists that you're around, they're human beings with human lives and motivations and biases. And I guess I like to include an idea of who the people are and what their lives are like, because I think it helps you see how they've come to their decisions. What are you worried about looking silly for saying? If you think somebody really thinks something is true, or they've got an instinct about it, and they're worried that if they say it out loud now before they've got all the evidence and it's been through the journal, they'll look silly. That's what intrigues me most, because that is the edge of discovery. In animal behavior, people have been mocked. Lots of the researchers from the 70s could not get funding because they were so ridiculed, because they'd said things like parrots can understand abstract concepts. And it was so hard for them to evidence these claims, but they had spent their lives devoted to studying it, and they couldn't get funding, and they were made so they couldn't feed their families, and they had no esteem. So they were so scarred, so many of these researchers in animal communications, that they're very reticent. But they were mocked by people who were wrong, who had just had flashier tools like genetics testing kits and things with numbers and tools. They reassured other people enough to say, you guys must be right. And people spending their lives just watching a parrot, that doesn't seem flashy enough. So, it's not a Large Hadron Collider. You guys, we can dismiss you more easily. But a lot of those researchers were correct, and the people who dismissed them were wrong.
Have you ever had a personal experience with a whale or any other creature that felt to you like a moment of communication, that felt like that meeting of minds, whether you had the evidence or not, that just was that kind of profound experience?
Yeah, loads of times. I was swimming off Lundy and a seal came over and it was nibbling my fins. And then it had like a plastic bottle on the surface. And then it pushed the bottle over and it lay on its back and it played with it. And it kind of looked at me and like brought it over and then splashed it. I thought, I'm being played with. It's curious and it's playing with me. And that felt no different to me than how I act with my friend's toddlers. I have no idea what he was thinking, but it feels like a pretty reasonable hypothesis that both of us had an idea that there was another entity there and that our interactions were affecting each other's interactions.
Yeah, it sounds less crazy than the alternative of assuming that there's nothing there and no meaning there and we're the only creatures that are capable of that kind of communication. I
think it takes a certain level of belief to decide there's nothing there, and to begin with it being a blank slate and a machine unless you can prove otherwise. And the people who really think that, I'm worried, do they think that about me? Do they go through life just assuming because they've got no absolute proof that other people exist, or that they exist and they're not a brain in a vat?
Well, that's the extreme of that position, isn't it? And I guess it's quite profound, really, in terms of how we survive on this planet generally. Are we open to that possibility of connection, and that we are just like the rest of life on this planet, or seeing ourselves as something completely separate?
Well, I think that's the motivation for a lot of the scientists who are trying to investigate the communication of other animals. So like when Roger Payne and Katie Payne and Scott McVeigh discovered whale song, it was a huge deal, and it was beautiful and it moved us, and it helped in our culture us go from thinking that these animals that we'd removed mostly and were about to get rid of, and there's only a couple of thousand humpbacks left, but that they sang, maybe they're slightly like us. And that curiosity meant we went and found out all these other things about their lives, and it galvanized the Save the Whales movement, and people played their song to each other. And we stepped back and we had a moratorium in industrial whaling, and many of the whale numbers have recovered enough that humpback whales returned to Monterey Bay to jump on top of me, returned to Brighton for me to see them, 5 minutes walk from where we're sat, because we stopped deciding what we thought about them and were curious enough to listen.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this clip, you can hear the full interview on Where the Wild Thoughts Are, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow this channel for more wild thoughts.